Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Williams, Programs and Community Partnerships Manager at Chabot Space and Science Center, and we are thrilled to bring you another exciting program live this evening. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We wish we could be up at our center this evening, but due to the air conditions, we decided to do this from home. So you can see I have my beautiful Chabot background during the daytime of our telescope domes. I hope everyone is doing all right out there. Tonight, we have with us Ben Burress, who will take us back through more than 135 years of Oakland history. Chabot Space and Science Center has very old roots in Oakland and no fewer than 3 incarnations as a student and public observatory and science education center. Now celebrating the 20th anniversary at its present location on Skyline in Oakland, Chabot Space and Science Center turns 137 this year. Tonight's presentation will trace and illustrate the rich and captivating history of an observatory dedicated to educating the public about science and the universe from its very inception. If you want to keep the party going, join us on Friday at 8 p.m. for Chabot's Star Party Spectacular. This Friday at 8 p.m., we're throwing an out-of-this-world virtual fundraising event to celebrate STEM education at our Chabot Star Party Spectacular. This evening will include STEM activities, Chabot trivia, engaging speakers, including astronaut Rusty Swikart, and more. We will end with a special telescope viewing at the end of the night. Please consider making a donation tonight to help us keep these free programs accessible and engaging to all. You can make a difference in less than a minute when you support STEM education. And now I would like to introduce to you Ben Burress.
Hello.
Hi, Ben.
Having a little video trouble here, but bear with me.
I see you have your Chabot background of the evening sky at the domes.
Well, I did. I may have to, makes me kind of invisible when I turn it on. It's the pandemic.
That's all right. It looks nice though.
Cuts out half my face, but that's okay. You're not here to look at my face anyway.
Well, thank you, Ben, for joining us. We're really looking forward to your talk this evening. Ben Burress has been a staff astronomer at Chabot Space and Science Center since July 1999. He graduated from Sonoma State University in 1985 with a bachelor's degree in physics and a minor in astronomy, after which he signed in for a 2-year stint in the Peace Corps, where he taught physics and mathematics in the African nation of Cameroon. From 1989 to 1996, he served on the crew of NASA's Kuiper Airborne Observatory at NASA Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California. From 1996 to 1999, he was head observer at the Naval Prototype Optical Interferometer Program at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. He has also been a regular science writing contributor to the KQED website since 2005. Thank you, Ben, for joining us. Take it away.
Thanks very much. Very glad to be here tonight and to share with you some of the highlights of Chabot's long and rich history. Let me get my little screen share going here so you can see what I'm talking about. As Jessica said, though tonight we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the opening of Chabot Space and Science Center, the history of Oakland's observatory and astronomy education goes back to the year 1883. To put a little historical perspective on that, here are a few highlights chosen at random of things going on that year. The Krakatoa volcano erupts. Lewis Waterman begins experiments to invent the fountain pen. Congress authorizes the first steel vessels in the US Navy. The first telephone call was made between New York City and Chicago. And standard time zones were established in the US and Canada. So a long history, yes, going back to when Oakland was a young, somewhat sleepy town. And as we have 137 years of history to get touch upon, let's get started. So let's go back to the beginning, to the inspiration and realization of what would become a long institution of science and space education for, well, basically anyone who came to Chabot. So it all began when the superintendent of Oakland Public Schools, Jewett Gilson, visited a school for boys in Philadelphia. The school happened to have a rooftop observatory for use by the students. And when Gilson saw this, he said, Oakland has to have one of these too. So he went back to Oakland and looked for somebody to pay for such an observatory. And that's where one Anthony Chabot comes into the picture. Anthony Chabot was not an astronomy buff or an amateur astronomer or anything like that. He was a water engineer. He made his fortune as a water engineer building water systems. I'll get to that in a moment. He's also a philanthropist. So he provided the money that built the very first Chabot Observatory. Here's a historical picture. Anyone know where this is? This is Lake Merritt, believe it or not, in the heart of Oakland. You're looking kind of northeast toward the Oakland Hills. And in the foreground, the streets intersecting there are First Avenue and 15th Street. So it's not too far from where Merritt Bakery is and the tennis courts around the corner there. But that house was Anthony Chabot's house. Around the time of his death, he lived there until he passed away. But Chabot was a very busy person. He started building his fortune developing hydraulic gold mining technologies in the Sierras. So if you've ever visited a park like Malakoff-Diggins State Park up in the Sierras, the old gold rush era mining area, you'll see the environmental devastation caused by some of Anthony Chabot's early inventions, hydraulic gold mining nozzles. But it gets better. He came back to the Bay Area and built a lot of water systems around the San Francisco Bay, including in San Francisco, San Jose, Vallejo, and the East Bay. In fact, he built what is now called Lake Chabot, and it was originally the San Leandro Reservoir, but when they built other San Leandro reservoirs, this one became Lake Chabot. He also built Lake Temescal, so he's really into water. In fact, his company, the Contra Costa Water Company, became East Bay Municipal Utility District later on. Let's see here. He was also the first president of the Oakland Gas Light Company, a company that generated and distributed gas to run, among other things, street lamps before electrification happened. He also, in his will, left a bequest to build the Oakland Women's Home. There's a home for single working mothers in Oakland. But the bequest we're interested, not bequest, the donation, he's still alive. What we're interested in is the money, the $3,000 that he provided for purchase of the first Chabot telescope, the 8-inch refractor, and the building of the observatory. So here's a very old picture during construction in 1883 of what would become the tower on which the 8-inch telescope would sit, and the stone pier on the inside of the scaffolding work you can see there. Let's see. After it was built, can you spot Chabot Observatory in this picture? You're in Oakland, looking west, southwest from what was then the Masonic Temple. The street in the right-hand side, the big broad street, that's 12th Street. If you look over to the left of the picture, about halfway up, you'll see a little tower with a dome on top. That's the original Chabot Observatory in downtown Oakland. Let's get a little closer picture on that. So yeah, here's a picture taken looking kind of northwest from a corner of the property. The observatory building was originally called the Oakland Observatory in 1883 because Anthony Chabot didn't want it to be named after him. I think he was kind of a humble guy in that respect. He wasn't interested in having his name plastered all over everything the way it is today. But it was renamed Chabot Observatory after his death in 1888, after public opinion pushed for that. It was also nicknamed the mucilage bottle because of its unusual shape. And yeah, that's a very nice picture of the original, still called Oakland Observatory, you can see on the side there. So this is within the first 5 years of the building of this. By the way, the oak trees you see in the background, especially the ones on the left, are still living there today. And I'll tell you where you can go if you want to see that. In fact, here we go, using Google Earth and a very old Oakland map. If you want to find your way to Lafayette Park, which is between 10th and 11th Streets and Jefferson Street and Martin Luther King Jr. Way, there's a park there, Lafayette Square. You can go down there and enjoy lawns and sculptures and whatnot. But what's of real interest here, if you look in the picture on the left, the Google Earth shot, that circular green area. Let's get a little closer ground view here. So here's two shots that feature a dome-shaped lawn. So there's a circular dome-shaped lawn that we discovered down there when we went down and did our site survey. This is to commemorate the original location of the tower for the 8-inch telescope. So go on down there, and we put a plaque down there so you can see the spot. Now, once they built Oakland Observatory, they had to have someone to run it. So they actually hired 3 men to be the original staff of the Oakland Observatory, including Charles Burkhalter, who ended up being the one with staying power. He was there until his death, or he was with Chabot until his death, actually. But he'd actually been working in an insurance office, and he was an avid, whoops, oh, that's okay. Accidentally went too far, but that's all right. You can look at this picture. He was an avid amateur astronomer. The previous picture showed him with his 4-inch refractor. He was touted as being the first person in Oakland, maybe with a telescope, but certainly the first amateur astronomer in Oakland. So he was the right pick for the job, I think, especially since later on he built an observatory in his backyard. That's the picture you're seeing now, to house his 10-inch reflecting telescope. So that was in his backyard on Chester Street. It's not there anymore. I looked for it with Google Earth, and I think the building's gone. But anyway, it's a young Charles Burkhalter over on the right. So he was the right guy for the job. But the fact that he had an observatory in his backyard makes the Oakland Observatory technically the 2nd observatory in Oakland, but that's all right. So as I said, he was an avid amateur astronomer. He did all sorts of stuff. Here's a picture. I love this picture, actually. I put it in here partly just for the clothing they're wearing and the postures. But this was taken up at Lick Observatory during one of the Venus transits in the late 1800s. So Burkhalter was there to observe the Venus transit, a fairly rare event when Venus passes in front of the sun. Only happens in pairs separated by more than 100 years. So Burkhalter was there in I don't know which of the 2 of the pairs this was, but he was there to observe it. And we observed both of the more recent modern Venus transit up at the current Chabot Space Science Center. So that was very cool, but it hadn't happened since this picture, basically. That's Charles Burkhalter on the left with his hand in the pocket, by the way. So here's a couple of pictures of the original 8-inch telescope, which is now named Leah, later named Leah, by Burkhalter. On the left, Burkhalter is looking through Leah. This picture on the left, we believe, is the only one we were able to find that we believe was actually taken in the observatory at the original site at Lafayette Square. So that's pretty cool. The one on the right, we believe, was taken at the 2nd Chabot site, which we'll get to. But anyway, starting in 1885 or so, when they were entertaining groups of the public and the students for free. By the way, telescope viewing was then, as it is now, free to the public, and that's actually part of a stipulation that Anthony Chabot put on his donation, that the telescope shall forever and always be open free for use by the public and the students of Oakland. So we carry on that tradition today, but with 3 telescopes, so it gets better. But back then, they could only accommodate 10 to 12 people at a time per evening. You often have to get reservations up to a month in advance, and you have to climb that tower on a rickety staircase and enter through a hatch for the privilege, but people loved it anyway. Who wouldn't, really? Charles Burkhalter was also a very avid solar eclipse chaser. He went all around the world, observing and photographing very, very nice photographs of solar eclipses, including he led an expedition to Cloverdale, exotic, faraway Cloverdale, California, in 1889. He went to Japan with a contingent from the Lick Observatory in 1896. Unfortunately, it was cloudy during the eclipse, so he was not able to see the eclipse that time. He went to India and set up, there's a picture of his solar eclipse telescope and camera here with some locals posing with the telescope in Jur, India. And at the turn of the century, 1900, in Siloam, Georgia, again, there's some locals posing with his telescope, his camera, that he hauled all around the world to get what were later regarded as, at the time, some of the best solar eclipse photographs in the world. Partly, in fact, especially with the Siloam, Georgia pictures, due to a technique that Burkhalter himself developed. The picture on the right is a close-up of part of his telescope. You can see all the electrical wires and connections of the mechanism he built that basically rotated a mask in front of the photographic plate to control the exposure of the image of the sun. You know, the problem with taking a picture of the sun is it's really bright up close and it gets really faint in the atmosphere as you go farther out. And it was really hard with the technology at the time to get a good picture of the entire eclipse from very close to the sun all the way out into its tenuous atmosphere. So his rotating mask controlled how much light got to the photographic plate and produced the best pictures of eclipses in the world at the time. In 1892, moving along, Chabot got a makeover, extreme makeover. The 8-inch telescope dome was rebuilt for easier access. I don't think people had to climb the ladder as steep as before. There's a classroom added, a workshop, and the reception area was enlarged. Here's some really cool hand-colored pictures, actually postcards from the era of the refurbished Chabot Observatory, including a shot in the bottom there that shows the Oakland High School at the time. It was right across the street. Good place to put Oakland's student observatory, across the street from the high school. But all good things must come to an end. The first Chabot Observatory was forced to relocate because of light pollution, something that plagues us around here even today. Originally, when Oakland was lit up, street lights and whatnot, by gas-powered lamps, light pollution wasn't so much of a problem. But as the population grew, and especially when lighting became electrified, when electrification of the city street lights and other sources of light grew, so did the light pollution problem. So it became less and less advantageous to have an observatory in downtown Oakland. The last straw, as Charles Burkhalter himself put it, over on the right, you'll see a picture of the then new Oakland City Hall, same building you would see today if you went down there to Frank Agala Plaza. The last straw was that bright beacon of electrified light coming out the top of the tower. He said this light was infamous to him because it was, well, he said the last straw. It was shining right down to the observatory. There weren't a lot of skyscrapers blocking the way back then. And so that was the final step that pushed for the relocation of the observatory. So they went looking for a new site somewhere farther away from town, away from the light pollution, hopefully in a place that maybe could be sheltered against light shining up from the city. They surveyed a number of sites in the East Bay and the East Bay Hills, but the one they finally settled upon was a site of an old family farm. You can see the farmhouses in the picture on the left. One of the selling points for this location was an electrified trolley system, the Leona rail line, that people could use to easily get to the observatory. Again, Chabot has always been a public observatory, not strictly a research observatory. Research observatories they put in faraway remote places that take a long time to get to and are just out in the wild because you want dark skies for the research. We'd love dark skies for a public observatory too, but you also have to put the observatory close to the people so they can actually get there. We wouldn't get many visitors if we were, up on top of a mountain. So this was the site. Picture on the left shows once it was built, the new Chabot Observatory building. on top of this little hill, which in turn was surrounded by kind of a ring of other hills that helped protect the area from light from the downtown area about 5 miles away. And as Burkhalter said, with a judicious planting of tall trees, that protection could be improved. One thing you might notice is that there are now 2 domes at Chabot Observatory. The smaller one on the right is the housing where the 8-inch, the original 8-inch telescope, Leah, was placed at the new site on Mountain Boulevard. The larger one, well, they wanted a bigger, newer telescope. So they made plans for that. Just so happened, around the time that Chabot was being moved and the new buildings built, the Panama Pacific International Exposition was going on in San Francisco. So it was a major international World's Fair exposition that was taking place around the Marina District in San Francisco. In fact, the only surviving structure from that World Fair is the Palace of the Fine Arts, where the Exploratorium was for so many years. That building was built for the exposition. Say that 5 times fast. But just so happens they were displaying a big 20-inch telescope. And Charles Burkhalter took advantage of the fact that it had already been shipped from the East Coast, was already in San Francisco, already in the Bay Area, and already assembled. And so he saved a lot of money in shipping and assembly and whatnot. So the telescope was bought. The 20-inch lens blank glass was bought from the Schott Optical Works in Jena, Germany. So it was about the time that World War I was getting started. So they only got the glass out of Germany with special permission from the German government. And only shortly thereafter, the British naval blockade was raised, which would have complicated things. But finally, the lens blank made it to Oakland after an arduous journey and was put into a bank vault in downtown Oakland until it could be shaped into a lens. Master lens crafter John Brashear was hired to do that task. And oh yeah, had to throw in a very old photograph of my favorite object to look at through the 20-inch telescope, Rachel. Many of you know Rachel. Saturn is, I think, the most stunning object in the sky that you can look at through a telescope. If you don't believe me, come up sometime and take a look. So here's a shot of Charles Burkhalter on the left. These are the principles surrounding the acquisition and building of the 20-inch telescope. John Brashear, lens master, lens crafter in the middle, and Ambrose Swayze of Warner and Swayze, the company that built the mechanical parts of the 20-inch telescope. So Charles Burkhalter attempted to retire from his position as director of Chabot Observatory 3 times, and all 3 times he was denied. Personally, I don't understand that. I think when you want to retire, if you're able to, you should be allowed to, but such was the work ethic of the time, I guess. He died still being the director of Chabot Observatory in 1923, following a wildfire that threatened the observatory. And there's some who think that maybe the stress from the fire and the threat it posed to the observatory contributed to his death. Anyway, as the story goes, before he died on his deathbed, he handed the keys of Chabot Observatory to Earl Linsley and told him something like, never give them up. Apparently, the Oakland schools had tried to shut down the observatory more than once, and so he was in a position to defend it more than once, but kept going. So Earl Linsley, he was a professor of geography at Mills College, which is actually just a short walk from the second Chabot Observatory site. And being a career educator, he expanded Chabot Observatory's educational programs, public programs, school programs. He brought in a lot more people to the observatory, and he also did a lot of outreach into the community. He did a lot of presentations in schools and community centers, telling people about space sciences, astronomy, all sorts of subjects. But he kept his day job too, teaching at Mills, because he could walk back and forth between the two. In fact, there was a passage we read that he never really slept. He took cat naps on the hammock on the porch and between his day job and his night job. But being a avid educator, he did a lot of things for Chabot, including calling in, putting out a call for all people interested in astronomy, enthusiasts in space sciences, to gather at Chabot Observatory and form a community of amateur astronomers, originally called the East Bay Amateur Astronomical Association. The organization is today called the East Bay Astronomical Society. And in one form or another, the East Bay Astronomical Society has been giving their volunteer support to Chabot Observatory since 1924, operating telescopes, educating the public, participating in outreach and remote events. Another interesting story I wanted to mention, just one of those history points of Chabot Observatory, was the recovery of the great Goose Lake meteorite in 1938. So the story goes, there were 3 hunters from Oakland, the Oakland area, up in the Modoc lava beds area in northeastern California. And they came upon a very unusual looking small boulder, which had holes in it and it looked melted. And apparently when they hit it with a hammer, it rang like a bell. And just so happens that one of these hunters, Clarence Schmidt, which you can see on the right there, had attended one of Earl Linsley's outreach programs, one of his lectures about meteorites, which is how he recognized it to be probably of celestial origin. So they went back and reported this, and there was a big buzz about trying to recover this. In fact, more than one person tried to go and find it and recover it. But it turns out it had fallen on federal land. It was found on federal land anyway. And so it automatically belonged to the Smithsonian Institution. But Smithsonian deputized Earl Linsley to go and recover it. So he mounted an expedition to go up, and Clarence Schmidt helped him find it, relocate it. And they hauled it out of the wilderness, a 2,573-pound chunk of nickel iron, the largest meteorite ever recovered in California. And no, I'm not sure who that kid is sitting on the meteorite. Maybe I'll look it up, but I did not find a reference. After bringing it back to Oakland, Linsley had it put on display on Treasure Island during the Golden Gate International Exposition in 1939-1940. But the fact was it belonged to the Smithsonian technically, and they wanted it back at the end of its display. But before he crated it up and sent it back, Earl Linsley had a plaster cast, full-size, full-scale plaster cast of the Goose Lake meteorite made. And that is still on display at Chabot Space Science Center. So you can go and see how big it was and what it looked like today. But the rest of it is at the Smithsonian if you want to see the real thing. So skipping ahead a few decades here, Chabot Observatory got an upgrade later on with funding from a Rotary Club, Oakland Rotary Club in the area. They built a new building that included a public classroom and a planetarium with a Spitz projector, a little 30-foot dome, which is only a little relatively speaking. I remember going here myself in the 60s and absolutely loving the planetarium shows. I could imagine sitting there in the dark looking up at the dome and the stars projected there, that I was actually looking out at the real sky. So it was quite an impressive experience for me. Some of the other things that happened in this era, around the late 1950s and the 1960s and such, one was Operation Moonwatch in 1957 in response to the launching of Sputnik, the Sputnik satellite by the Soviet Union. There was an effort to do some amateur observations to basically track the orbit of Sputnik by getting a bunch of volunteers together, scanning the skies, scanning the celestial meridian with special little spy scope telescopes. And by noting whose telescope Sputnik passed through and what part of the field of view, they were able to get an idea of the trajectory of Sputnik and know what the Soviet Union was sending over our heads and where. So that was a big end of the 50s kind of program. Another one was NASA's optical tracking network, which Chabot Observatory took part in during the Apollo program. The idea here was that NASA wanted to have a collection of optical observatories like Chabot to be able to make observations of Apollo spacecraft going to and from the moon for various things. They observed all sorts of events. For instance, when the booster rockets connector panels would fly off into space and the command module of the Apollo spacecraft would be detached, they could observe that action. The panels flying off into space would change the brightness of what they were looking at. Or sometimes when the astronauts would do a urine dump and a cloud of freezing urine would fly off into space, they could observe that too. But more significantly, the network was for tracking the motion of the Apollo spacecraft. And one part of Chabot's story tells that it may have been instrumental in at least assisting save the Apollo 13 astronauts. For there came a point during the return trip when NASA needed to know the trajectory of Apollo 13 so they could tell the astronauts exactly where to fly so that they didn't bounce off the atmosphere or burn up in it. If you remember the movie Apollo 13, there was that paper thin target they had to hit to get back to Earth successfully. But the story was that all of the optical tracking network observatories at the time they needed the information had cloud cover except Chabot Observatory. So someone from NASA called up, a person at Chabot answered, and they asked for observations of Apollo. They were made, and minutes after the last observation, the fog rolled in. So in the nick of time. That's the story, and we have some concrete evidence to support it. So I like that one. Around this era too, this was the Kingsley Whiteman era. Kingsley Whiteman is the man I remember growing up when I would go to Chabot. He was the quintessential Dr. Science with the white lab coat and everything, who was basically the observatory director, but he was also the educator. He would educate and entertain groups of school kids and public who would come in. Those kids sitting in the chairs right there, that's a little after my era in the 60s. This is probably in the 70s. But those are the same chairs I would sit in when I was very young. So Kingsley Whiteman was great. He was Mr. Science, and he would give us the class, take us upstairs, give us a planetarium show, and then he and volunteers over at the telescopes would entertain us for the rest of the evening, looking through both the 8-inch and 20-inch telescopes. Here's a night shot of the second Chabot Observatory. The 20-inch telescope dome is on the left. You can see part of the 8-inch dome cropped off at the edge. This building is still there. It's boarded up. Unfortunately, it's a little dilapidated, but you can see it if you drive by on Highway 13 up through the trees. You can catch a glimpse of it. Trees are getting a little thick, but if you look hard without looking away from the road, if you're the one driving, you can see them there. But again, all good things come to an end. Where the first observatory was relocated because of the light pollution, the second had to be moved because of the Earth, namely the Hayward earthquake fault, which runs right alongside the observatory site. In fact, if you've ever driven up and down Highway 13 and 580 going east from 13, you have driven right along the Hayward fault. Something about the nice, even, long valleys that earthquake faults can sometimes form are great places to build things like freeways. So the freeway marks the spot. But the fact was, being so close to what is probably the most dangerous earthquake fault in the Bay Area, Chabot Observatory could no longer legally let school groups into the telescope domes. And students were the lifeblood, the mission of Chabot pretty much. So the decision had to be made. Do we retrofit do a big major earthquake retrofit of the facility so that we can let school groups back in, or do we relocate? And it was decided to raise the funds to move the observatory again. You see in the picture on the right, all the earthquake faults. The present Chabot Science Center is, in fact, the previous one, of course, because this is an old map. The future one, which is where we are now, the red box at the top, is located up off of Skyline Boulevard. And here we are today, in the best location possible for an observatory in Oakland. In fact, we could not go any higher or farther away from the city of Oakland without being no longer in the city of Oakland. The edge of Chabot actually straddles counties, Alameda County on one side, Contra Costa right on the other side of the fence. And height-wise, we're at 1,500 feet, and just a stone's throw away from the highest point in Oakland, Redwood Peak, which is actually technically in Contra Costa County. So technically, I think Chabot is the highest point in Oakland and Alameda County, or Oakland at least. So, interesting thing about this site is it was actually one of the sites considered for the 1915 relocation. Makes sense putting an observatory high up on a mountain, but it was considered far too remote, too far away for a public observatory. It would be too hard for people to get to. There was no good roads, no electric trolley line, whatever to get people there. It was way off in the wilderness. Some people still have that perception today, even though we're just 5 minutes up the road. So it is returning to a spot that it might have moved to 105 years ago. And just little note keeping here, the Joint Powers Authority Board of Chabot is run by the City of Oakland, Oakland Unified School District, East Bay Regional Parks District, with representation by the East Bay Astronomical Society. So now we're up to the last 20 years. Again, we're here to celebrate the opening of Chabot Space and Science Center 20 years ago today, August 19th, 2000. So I wanted to give you a little history of that 20 years by showing you some of the facilities, some of the programs we've done, the highlights of things that have happened at Chabot in the last 20 years. These things are not happening at this moment because of the pandemic we're in. But at the very least, it can show you what we've been up to for the last 20 years. So facilities-wise, this is a much bigger Chabot than it had ever been in the past, with 3 major exhibition halls, a huge 70-foot diameter dome planetarium with 3 different projection systems, notably the Zeiss fiber optic projector, planetarium projector, a full dome digital system, and a laser music show system. Chabot also has a theater, originally a 70mm film theater, but used for a lot of different purposes today, including live science demonstrations, distinguished lectures, live viewing events of NASA landings on Mars and things like that. A lot of fun. 3 observatories. So with every Chabot observatory incarnation, there has been the addition of a telescope, 1 for the Lafayette Square, 2 for Mountain Boulevard, and in 2003, the 3rd telescope, which we'll get to in a moment, a 36-inch reflecting telescope was built for the 3rd location. 6 classrooms and a Challenger Learning Center, a mission control and spacecraft mission simulation chamber. Great for team building exercises, but it has served many groups, including corporate groups coming for team building exercises, school groups, lots of them. We even did missions in the past for the California School for the Blind with special aid equipment, braille terminals and whatnot. It's quite a thing. And as we've been doing for over 135 years now, observatory programs, telescope viewing happens for free, weather permitting. We can accommodate more than 10 to 12 people a night now, so don't worry about that. Right now, of course, live viewing is virtual until we get reopened. But normally every Friday and Saturday night, you can find, weather permitting, free telescope viewing at Chabot. Actually some astronomical research has been done by Chabot's enthusiastic amateur astronomers, including detecting extrasolar planets, planets orbiting other stars, near-Earth objects, asteroids that have the possibility of coming very close to the Earth. We have some people up there who track those, and a lot of astrophotography over the years, beautiful astrophotography. Every special astronomical event that comes around, like an eclipse or a transit of Venus or Mercury, meteor showers, we often hold special events at our observatories for those. And, well, lots of different programs go on the deck, day and night. Over the years, we've had quite a few distinguished and famous lecturers, visitors, and whatnot at Chabot. But you might ask, how has Albert Einstein ever come to Chabot if Chabot's only been there 20 years? Well, it's a nuanced answer. Actually, his accountant's niece came and gave a presentation of her firsthand experiences of meeting and kind of growing up around Albert Einstein. But Albert Einstein actually did visit the previous Chabot on Mountain Boulevard years ago when he was on the West Coast. So if you come and look through the 20-inch telescope, maybe the 8 as well, you can think Albert Einstein looked through this telescope once a long time ago. Our school programs attract or serve about 40,000 school children per year with all-day experiences, classroom education, shows in our theater and planetarium, and exploration of Chabot's exhibits. We've also conducted quite a few teacher professional development workshops and professional networking groups at Chabot over the years. It's all about supporting education, right? Summer camps, we have been running themed summer camps since opening, space-themed, science-themed, week-long experiences, day camps. We don't do overnight camps, but same kids come back for a whole week and very often come back for multiple weeks during the summer. And we do outreach. So we have staff and volunteers who take our science lessons and demonstrations and cool explosions and things like that out to the schools and community centers, including an inflatable portable planetarium to deliver planetarium shows just about anywhere. And we wouldn't be what we are without volunteer dedication. We have, for a long time, had volunteers efforts supporting a lot of Chabot's programs. So ordinarily we have a core of about 150 active adult volunteers, some who have been at Chabot since opening 20 years ago. They can't get enough of the place, but they come in to explain our exhibits to people, conduct demonstrations on the exhibit floor, get trained up to operate our telescopes at night, do presentations. And of course, volunteerism at Chabot goes all the way back to at least 1924 when the East Bay Astronomical Society, or its earlier name, which I'm not reading right now, but it did have that earlier name, got started. Including an offshoot of that, the Telescope Makers Workshop, which has been running since 1930 in one form or another, which this group helps anyone who wants to build a telescope do so. I think they said that the youngest person who they helped build a telescope was a 5-year-old girl, the oldest a 95-year-old woman. So anyone who wants to build a telescope, they will give a helping hand and show how to do it. Now, our dress code for volunteers at Chabot is very strict. Now, these pictures were taken during one of our volunteer appreciation events. It took place around the Oscars time, so it was a themed event. But we do treat our volunteers very well because they treat us so well as well also. And then you can't not mention our teenage volunteers, the Galaxy Explorers and the Champions of Science. So since slightly before opening, we have had programs for enrichment and volunteerism for teens, for high school students who come in to develop and present science demonstrations for the public visitors, support special events, facilitate public outreach events in our communities. They form specialty teams, and they have actually taken part in exchange programs for a couple of different programs. A bunch of them went to Hong Kong, and also a group went to Calcutta, India on planetarium development exchange programs with other students, other teams there. So our Galaxy Explorers also do a lot at Chabot. And here's some pictures of them doing what they do best, taking out the science demonstrations they develop and purveying them to our guests on our exhibit floors. But they do many other things as well. I think the statistic I heard was that 100% of our Galaxy Explorers have gone on to college. So it's a feeder program too. And here's just some pictures of the specialty teams I mentioned. There's an astronomy team who takes out a telescope that they refurbished years ago every Friday night. And so they do their own public telescope viewing at Chabot. And the engineering team and a planetarium team who would use the inflatable planetarium. That brings us back to the present. Thank you very much for listening to my talk. I think I kept it under an hour. Hope I wasn't going too fast at points, but I hope you enjoyed. And I think we're going to attempt to answer any questions that might come in.
Thank you, Ben. What a wonderful presentation and such a rich history that Chabot Space and Science Center has in Oakland. And so wonderful to look back all of those years and just see the progression of all that. I was just curious what a mucilage bottle is. I think that's my first question that I had.
You know, I had to look it up myself, but then when I started seeing pictures, I remember when I was a kid in the 60s, these paper glue bottles with the little rubber diagonal tip that you would squash the rubber tip and through a little orifice, the glue would come out. So mucilage is an ingredient that's used in glue and other things like that, but it's basically a glue bottle.
That's so interesting. I'd never heard of that before.
I heard of mucilage, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was.
It was really a beautiful presentation and so wonderful to see, you know, even Chabot now and how we're still holding the tradition of free telescope viewings.
Yeah.
Even to this day. And even though now we're doing them virtually, you know, keeping that tradition alive is really special.
Yeah.
And, so great to see all those images, you know, of people inside the center. I know that we're all missing the people right now, and that's why we're doing these virtual programs, but can't wait till, you know, hopefully soon we can open our doors to the public again.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, there was a few questions that actually came through, and if anyone else has any questions for Ben, we can take questions for a few more minutes. One of the first questions was, is Chabot still involved in NASA programs?
Yes. Over the years, Chabot has been involved in a number of NASA programs in different ways. NASA was a partner in last year's Luminous Moon exhibit, where we had the exhibition of beautiful pictures of the moon in our gallery. That was in partnership with NASA Ames. Like I say, in the past, there have been teacher workshops that have been funded through NASA grants, and we've taken field trips to NASA Ames. I know NASA Ames has done a lot of things with us in the past, and I think are interested in continuing that as well.
Yeah.
But yes.
A couple talks from NASA Ames scientists here recently about Mars and Mars 2020, which was pretty exciting. So always looking for new opportunities to work with NASA and NASA Ames.
Yeah.
Someone's asking if we can see the history of Chabot there at the observatory, like all of the old photographs of the founders.
We have in the observatory domes a few years ago, we built an exhibit on the history of Chabot. It's not filled with lots of historical pictures from our archives. We do have a lot of historical pictures in the archive, but we selected a lot to curate a story about Chabot, kind of the story I just told, but it is set up in the 3 telescope domes, starting with Leah, the oldest telescope, the 8-inch, moving into the 20-inch Rachel, and then finally out to the well, not as much, but in the 36 inch. So we do have some artifacts on display, some pictures, some recreations of Charles Burkhalter's postcard from the top of the Great Pyramid during one of his trips to take pictures of solar eclipses. So there are some on display. But there's a lot more in our archive that could be pulled out and displayed in some fashion.
I have seen that the replica of the meteorite, which is very impressive. It is very large.
Goose Lake meteorite, yeah.
Someone asked how the viewing for the Perseid meteor shower was. They're in Cincinnati, and they said that they had pretty bad light pollution.
Yeah, I got out there a couple times. I saw maybe one meteor. I didn't go very far away from home, and I'm in San Leandro, so there's light pollution down here. And maybe I didn't stay up as late as I might have. But I think this year was pretty typical for the Perseids. I do know some friends. I know one friend who was up in Sonoma, the Sonoma area, out in a very dark place, and he said he saw quite a few. So it really depends on how far away from the light pollution you can get, I think, because that will limit the number of meteors you can see.
And then someone is asking if their kids can volunteer online.
Volunteer online?
Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe that means the Galaxy Explorer program, perhaps.
Well, that's a question that can be put to our Galaxy Explorer leaders. I don't know about online, but I'm not the one to answer that anyway. So
I think the answer to that would be we do have the Galaxy Explorer program, and there is an intake of students every year. I believe we just finished our intake more recently, and then every year we do look for new students, and that is a volunteer opportunity. And this year, I'm sure there are virtual options since we can't be together in person. But mostly when we're open, it is an in-person. But it's a wonderful, wonderful program for our high school students and champions of science for our middle school students.
My daughter was a Galaxy Explorer for 3 or 4 years.
It was so great to read your daughter's blog post as well. If anyone hasn't gotten a chance to check that out, Sam Burress wrote a beautiful blog post about growing up at Chabot for the last 20 or so years, and just really neat history of her own experience. So
20 memories of 20 years. Yeah, she was trying to pull out a different memory from each year. She was, well, since I've been at Chabot.
Pretty neat way to grow up. That's really neat.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Ben. It looks like we are out of questions at this point. We are so happy that everyone joined us today. Thank you again, Ben, for your time.
You're welcome.
It was a
Thanks.
wonderful, wonderful history lesson that we learned today. I definitely learned a lot. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Tune in every Friday evening at 8 p.m. for a variety of engaging programming that you can enjoy and participate in from home. And also tune in every Saturday evening at 9:30 for our live virtual telescope viewing with our resident astronomers. This coming Friday at 8 p.m., we're throwing an out-of-this-world virtual fundraising event to celebrate STEM education at our Chabot Star Party Spectacular. This evening will include exciting STEM activities, Chabot trivia, engaging speakers, and it will end with a special telescope viewing that you don't want to miss. And we have a special guest, Apollo 9 astronaut Rusty Swikart. You don't want to miss seeing him at our event as well. While we work towards a grand reopening, we appreciate everyone's time and support as we find new ways to learn together. These events are fueled by you, our community, and a special thanks to our members and donors and partners for helping us bring science to life for everyone at home. Right now, STEM education is more important than ever, and we need your help to make these STEM programs accessible for everyone. If you'd like tonight's program, please consider making a quick donation either here on Facebook on the button below or through our website at chabotspace.org and help us power our STEM education and launch the next generation of scientists, engineers, and innovators. We also have a virtual auction going on, a silent auction, and we will post a link in the chat so that you can access that. It's also on our website, and we have lots of wonderful experiences. Some of the prints from our Luminous Moon exhibition. I believe there's a hike and a private telescope viewing that you can bid on. Wonderful experiences that will all go towards supporting STEM education. Thank you all again, and we hope to see you next time. Stay curious.